thank you so much. I just wanted to really thank the people who made it. My husband Jim Schoonover was such a big part of Vera's voice and the video. And then there was also my son Will Rice, who did the soundscape, which was such a huge part of pulling it all together. And wonderful editor Elena Newton, who I was fortunate to run into. We never have met face to face. We used some wonderful software that made editing, co-editing in different places possible. Theresa Whitehill for all her wonderful poetry, important poetry, and the readers that include our Mendocino County Youth Poet Laureate, absolutely gorgeous voice, and the next county over, Lake County Poet Laureate, Georgina Marie Coronado. So thank you so much.
Alicia Rice. Theresa Whitehill, a California-born poet and letterpress artist. The publications include Cascadian Zen and Heavy Lifting. Go figure. In fact, she did a lot of the heavy lifting for Cascadian Zen. So it's appropriate that she be here and the artwork be displayed here and on the merch table. She, more than anyone, is responsible for the visual lusciousness of Cascadian Zen. It would not have been the same book without her. I'm so grateful to have met her through Mary Norbert Corti, which we'll get into, but in large part, this book is what it is, Cascadian Zen, because of her. Please give a warm hand to Theresa Whitehill.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Cascadia Poetics Lab. Thank you, Subud House, Felicia. It's been a journey, to say. So I'm going to read one poem from the project, and then we're going to get into the rest of the program, honoring some of our poets who have passed on. This is called The Loveliness of Mistakes. And out of it, this was the first poem that I sent Felicia after hearing her speak at the Legion of Honor in 2019. And it's what prompted her to write back to me and invite me to collaborate with her on this project. The Loveliness of Mistakes. What do you do, Felicia, when you've spent 2 days making something and then realize it's all wrong and there's no making it right? You suck it up. You order new paper. You start over. And what do you do with a history of mistakes but see that they clear an uncanny path to those things that are most important to you? Those things at the heart of science and culture, the reliquaries of creativity. Because each in its own way is unforeseen. A really good mistake should be something that involves venturing into new territory. And the fear of the mistake is probably akin to the fear of the ending of life. You dread going down the short, predictable path. You prevaricate. You pet the cat. You know something now that you didn't know before. You have a resilience, a keen drive to make something beautiful, even as beauty recedes. You hold in your hand a partial treasure map, a symptom. The world and its resources and pleasures and aches is your home. You can no longer be denied. No matter how much love you find missing, you exist in your own skin with a thought that is not quite realized and a passion to articulate the heart of such puzzles. It was this that my classmates ridiculed in grammar school. And the one mistake I may have made at that time was to try so very hard for so many years afterward to watch what I said. Those glorious antiquarian phrases that would come into my mind and out of my mouth, those things that my cousin seemed to delight in, and that sometimes later must have brought her grief. I was impulsive and blurted out things that weren't helpful, and only gradually did I realize that they belonged to and were nourished by and touched the dream world, as well as something older. So this partial journey, you might complete it. There's no guarantee. You will map the energy of the gods to the little that you've been able to pin down. And you will be proud of your energy and your love, your energies and your loves. Your lovely energy, your proud love. Your willingness to mingle in the halls of the dead, bringing the dead treasures that cause their eyes to light up. Putting smiles back on faces that have lost flesh. You will speak to birds.
Next, we're going to talk about Bill Yake. Holly Hughes is the author of 4 collections of poetry, most recently Hold Fast, from which she read at Kubota Garden this morning. It was so beautiful to hear her read her work in the garden near the water. She's the co-author of The Pen and the Bell, Mindful Writing in a Busy World, editor of several anthologies, including Keep a Green Bough, Voices from the Heart of Cascadia, and Beyond Forgetting, poetry and prose about Alzheimer's disease. She served on the staff of the Pacific Lutheran University Low Residency MFA program for 13 years, and in 2022, she became co-publisher of Empty Bowl Press, continuing that tradition I suspect we're going to hear a lot about this afternoon. She divides her time between a log cabin in Indianola and her home in Chimicum. Please welcome Holly Hughes.
Thank you. Boy, I'm still so moved by that presentation, I don't really even have words right away, so I'll do my best. I wasn't sure the order of things, and I somehow thought Bill Yake being Y might be last. So forgive me while I find my notes, which I did write up, and which are in this folder. Okay. Introduction to Tess Gallagher. Well, while I'm looking, I'm going to hold up a beautiful book that Empty Bowl published, Waymaking by Moonlight. And Bill had published other books. We were, actually Michael Daley, is he here? Yeah. This was really Michael's project, that bringing this book in. And John and I took over a little bit after, and one of the things I was going to talk about, when I find it, was I was privileged to be able to go up to a reading that Bill did, a speakeasy reading that Bill did up in Bellingham. And it turned out to be his last reading. And so that's what I thought I would talk a little bit about. Okay. Before I do that, I wanted to go back and talk about the very first, my first encounter with Bill. I encountered him on the page before, and I loved his work. And Greg Darnes had, I think, designed many of his books. His books were just beautifully designed. I met Bill on a trip, actually, at the Blue River Writers Gathering in Oregon. I know some of you, Tim was there. Paul has been there, I know. And My first encounter with Bill, I'm going to read it here. We were sitting on a nurse log in an old-growth portion of the H.J. Andrews Forest when Charles Goodrich asked us each to share a short poem. Those of you who've been here will remember how this worked. I hadn't yet met Bill, though I knew his distinctive tall profile, his hat, his walking stick. He stepped into the forest behind a cedar and read his poem. I wish I could remember which poem, but what I do remember is the uncanny sense that he was channeling the cedar, that it was the cedar speaking in Bill's low, quiet voice. From then on, I brought that image to all of Bill's poems. He'd taken up the mantle of seer, sage, bard, as amanuensis for the natural world. As a scientist and poet, he brought the best of both worlds together, writing carefully observed, scientifically accurate poems that nevertheless took flight, like the sandhill cranes that he loved to photograph. We made several trips to Blue River together after that, carpooling with other poets from the peninsula, Tom Jay and Tim McNulty. And I always look forward to hearing Bill's gentle voice from the back seat, pointing out a hawk on a telephone pole, often what the rest of us had missed. So here's where I come to the part about the speakeasy reading. The last time I heard Bill read was in Bellingham in the fall at a speakeasy reading run by Luther Allen and Judy Kleinberg. It was Luther's idea to begin the reading by reading aloud, sort of in a Greek chorus fashion, the entirety of the title poem from Waymaking by Moonlight, which is quite a long poem. And it was haunting to hear Bill's words resonate throughout this beautiful old theater. If you've been to that theater, you can envision that. And the poem really took on mythic proportions. I can still kind of hear it echoing in my mind, and I can still see Bill's face as he listened, serious, his eyes closed, and a brief smile moving across his face like a sudden sunbreak. We all knew Bill was fighting a long battle with cancer, but we couldn't know then that that would be Bill's last public reading. And I'm so grateful to have been witness to it. Our last email from Bill, this is when John and I were at the helm of Empty Bowl. Our very last, that paper wants to be on the floor, I'm going to leave it. Our very last email from Bill was that he wouldn't be able to attend the deadline to return edits on his poem for I Sing the Salmon Home. He was on the way to the ER. And none of us knew that that would be his last visit. So I'd like to share his poem as it appears in I Sing the Salmon Home about his beloved local salmon stream with no edits made to it and no edits needed. Okay. I'm sorry, I thought we'd have a minute before we came into this portion. I'm prepared, but I don't have the page number marked here. There it is. The salmon of Green Cove Creek. Silver at sea, bright as breaking waves. Flashes that, in aging, turn to shadows of moss, green darting through ravines of forest and hard rain. I have come down to the stream gingerly, through a tunnel of Devil's Club, to lean on a walking stick now braced in mud, to greet and watch the water move. Salmon, chum, marked and blessed as if by muted sunlight that once worked and weaved its sudden way through cedar bowls. They met and thrash, insist upstream. Doused undulations congregate, engage in furtive, then blatant unisons. Flames they are that, when cooled, quiver against the generative flex, the royal flash and shiver to collapse ecstatic into a whole and circular moment, inverted and dying into fertility. So I imagine Bill with his salmon now, and I just love that last line, inverted and dying into fertility. So thank you, Bill. Rest in peace. Your words live on among us, and we're very grateful for them.
Bring on our next poet. Thank you, Holly. Sorry about that. Not giving you a heads up. Things are happening pretty fast this weekend, I have to tell you. All right, and I'm going to pull up the next poem on my Mac here, so that we have it, and I've got it. And I think we have about 18% battery, so I think we should be okay. Being a non-driver, Terran Campbell's haiku are primarily urban and about humans. She's been published in a couple of anthologies that shall remain nameless, as she says, except for one called Cascadia Zen Volume 1. Now retired, her day job had her managing a crisis line and training emergency services professionals. And she's going to talk about Bob Redmond. And I have to say that Bob also had a battle with cancer. And as I got the news that he was getting closer, what's the name of those memorial websites now that they have where you get updates? Caring Bridge. I saw that. Not good to see the update. And so I said, I'd like to drop off your contributor copy of Cascadia Zen. He said, okay, we'll drop it in the back, you know. And so I drove the mirror in, and I was ready to go to the back, and the door opened up, and it was Bob, and I gave him the book on September 5th. He said, I'm so happy to get this. He gave me a hug. He told me he loved me. He said, so this is it, is what he said. And I knew exactly what he meant. That was September 5th. He died on September 12th. And his associate is Terran Campbell. Terran, come on. Please welcome Terran Campbell.
Hi, everybody. So, Bob Redmond and I were two haiku poets that were honored to be chosen to be in the Cascadia Zen Volume 1. And I knew Bob primarily when he served as president of Haiku Northwest during the last year of his life. As Paul already said, he died on September 12th at age 57. Never one to toot his own horn, it has taken me a while to understand what a force of nature Bob was. We often say that, but he truly was a force of nature. Okay. It's there. It's gone. Oh, where do I need to keep my hands?
That finger there, right there the whole time.
All right, thank you. These are some of the facts of his life as I know it. Bob loved words, but he also took action. A true locavore, he created community with whatever he touched. He worked as an advocate activist at the food bank Northwest Harvest, served the unhoused through DSC, was the musical director at alternative station KCBS, and he knew that poetry could not feed or house people. He was the musical director, I already said that. He was director of a number of arts nonprofits, including 11th Hour Productions, Mopop, Capitol Hill Arts, One Reel, Town Hall, and Seattle City of Literature. In 2008, he became a beekeeper and founded the Urban Bee Company. And in 2010, he founded the Common Acre, blending ecology, agriculture, and the arts. After his diagnosis, he rebranded his business Survivor Bee. He began writing haiku while the writer in residence at Hugo House in 2005. His 2020 book, Under the Chestnut Tree, won the award for Best Chapbook from Snapshot Press. He is survived by his wife Amy and their son Jeffy.
move it on me, Paul. See? Not me.
Scrolling.
Yes, I'm not scrolling.
How to scroll.
I did it. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, one more. It's still there, okay. I got it now. Thanks. Thanks for your patience, everybody. I didn't have time to make this up. Bob embodied the spirit of Cascadianism through his tireless service to marginalized communities, ecology, and the arts. He knew from his own experience how tenuous life is for all of us on this planet. Here are some of his haiku. And I'll read it twice because haiku are so short, they come out. The shadow of the jay, deeper and deeper into the woods. The shadow of the jay, deeper and deeper into the woods. Lunar eclipse, little by little, mother forgets. Lunar eclipse, little by little, mother forgets. I awake from a butterfly's dream, emergency room. I awake from a butterfly's dream, emergency room. In haiku, there is a tradition that you write your death haiku, and this is Bob's. And I need to explain that the word supers is the word for the trays that go in and out of the beehive. Honey-laden supers, too heavy to lift. The hive goes on. Honey-laden supers, too heavy to lift. The hive goes on. Thank you.
You're next. But before you come up here, Bill Yates, Olive Trees and Carly. Pope Francis gives Trump a peace medal and encyclical on climate change that expresses, with all sincerity, the hope that Trump become a tree. This is a medallion by a Roman artist. It is an olive tree, which is a symbol of peace, the Pope says. He explains that it has two branches and a division of war in the middle. We can use peace, Mr. Trump responds. The Pope looks into the president's eyes. It is with all hope that you may become an olive tree to make peace, the Pope says. The New York Times, 24 May 2017. I'll admit to not knowing how this reincarnation thing is supposed to work, but am partial to a karma teaching lessons. Say this: Trump returns as a short, gnarly domestic tree, bearing smallish, bitter, testicular fruits scattered by Mediterranean migrants. A tree with fruits leached in brine and lye, then pressed into an oil preferred by vegetarians and health fanatics. May he stand a century in the unremitting sun and increasing heat and have no choice but to be useful. That's a tough act to follow, isn't it? Yeah, and you know, after Billy Yates writes a salmon poem, it's like, oh, I'm not going to go there. I can't do it like that. Those photographs too, he shared them on Facebook, and you can still look at the amazing nature of photographs, how he gets that close. When you're in nature, like I was with the white-crowned sparrow or whatever, and I'm going, it ain't going to be like what Bill did. Don't bother. Tim McNulty is a poet, essayist, and natural history writer, is the author of 3 poetry collections, Ascendance, published by Pleasure Book Studio, In Blue Mountain, Dusk, and Pawtrax, 10 chapbooks. He's the author of 11 books on natural history, including Olympic National Park, a natural history, and Washington's Mount Rainier National Park. He's involved in a new book as well, Salmon, Cedar, Rock, and Rain. He's received the Washington State Book Award, the National Outdoor Book Award. He lives in the Dungeness River watershed, foothills of the Olympic Mountains. He's active in Northwest environmental issues and especially has been said this weekend, helping with many other people get those goddamn LWAT dams done. What a beautiful thing that was to be involved in that. So please welcome Tim McNulty.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul. So I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about my late friend, Mike O'Connor, share a few poems. Mike was he was an Olympic Peninsula native. He was a Buddhist poet, translator, bioregional settler, woods worker, fiction writer, and a wonderful author of a dozen books, and a wonderful friend to me and many others on the peninsula, including at a time when, if you could believe it, some of us were just young writers trying to get our feet under us and find a way to survive in a pretty wild place. And Mike, kind of helped us get our first jobs, as we used to say. He taught us all a dozen ways to lose money in the woods. And so I thought I'd just read a few of Mike's poems, of his own poems. After he died, we, myself, Finn Wilcox, and Jack Estes, under Michael's editorial eye, put together a collection of Mike's own works. He liked to mix his translations in with his books of poems. We wanted to just pick out, what we felt were just the poems that were just really showed Mike's heart, his own. Put them together in this book, Old Growth, selected poems by Mike. So this first one I'm going to read is a couple of reasons I wanted to start with this. It's called Canyon Creek, and Canyon Creek happens to be where I live. It's our little sub-watershed that flows down into the Dungeness River. But at the time that Mike wrote this, I was living a long ways away, and Mike came up to my cabin on Pablo Creek. Pablo Creek was named by me, for Pablo Neruda. It's a little nameless creek over Lake Ealing, and he brought a bunch of poems. He brought a few poems to read, and I remember he read me this one that just knocked me out. So, Canyon Creek. It seems colder than it is outside. I should go look at the moon ripening in a thicket of stars, but I wanted to talk a little of creek water. How the stones in the shallow bed up Canyon Creek are as round and vivid as the eyes of deer. No, I meant rather to speak of the stillness under moss-laden old growth, bark on one fir so thick, seeds take root in it and soar, thinking as a young tree thinks it's the earth. No, that's not it exactly. I believe it was simpler, not even the surprise of so many waterfalls, nor the chattering companionship of squirrels and the stellar jay. As I stumbled through brush, worked through Devil's Club, skipped from rock to rock. I think it was when I was standing under those ancient trees, wringing out the bottoms of my jeans, beginning to think some thought that had come with me from town, growing a little melancholy in the shade, that I looked down from the creek and could see, looked down from the green bank and could see, yes, the creek in the sunlight. And it was just the creek in the sunlight. And it made me happy that it made me happy. So, this is we're kind of going into hunting season here and everywhere, and so I will read Mike's prayer to the hunters. Hunting the hunter. It is all like dream work. Rounded blue hills that make a place for the river, broken up cloud that lets the eagle who soars toward the blue through. A sudden 2-point buck splashing juncos from a field and a red-capped hunter in a pickup. the pop, pop of distant fire, a lick of breeze from the west. Crouched under gold vermilion maple, the poet aims his heart at the heart. Hunting the Hunter, and this is a poem of Mike's for our good buddy Jerry Gorswine, who also passed away a few months after Mike did, pandemic year of 21. And this is still Mike's home watershed. It was the Dungeness Grey Wolf. And there it is. Late Autumn at Grey Wolf Ridge, another seasonal poem. And it's dedicated to Jerry. Late in the afternoon, floating home like the raven, I stop to pick up in the rime of the river bridge, step out under a white half moon and the hilltop drift of candescent clouds. The shadows of these mountains are of such pitch and compass, the coldest of rivers must flow. After frost and the oratorio of storms, leaves have arranged circles at the foot of the maples. Huge, sinuous alders swing upward from the river's edge, their branches bare as extended fingers that have just let go of the clouds, while on overhanging cliffs, last sun stains brimming. Leaning on a metal railing, magnetic with cold, I watch the dwindled river bleed the dark ravine of a water that begins in the complexity of stars, sings in the watersheds of Leaf Valley, and yields our blue planet a light and necessary bliss. The grooved auger of the river turns and turns in the moss-lying tilt of its bed. The sun flares on a final icy peak, gutters and dies in the mountains in far grace of the skies. I had I'll do maybe one more of these, then a little poem for Mike that I wrote. So Mike traveled over to China, ended up living over there for most of the 80s, and 81 came most of the 80s and into the early 90s. Came back and found his way to the Rocky Mountains for a little while and connected with Andrew. I think they'll talk about that a little later. But he, against all our predictions, he took right to China. He was a journalist, editor, living in Taiwan. It's a big, huge city. And but then he met Bill Porter, and they ended up hanging out up in the mountains above Taiwan. This is called Mildew and Henry David Thoreau. During the plum blossom monsoon in the mountains of southern China, you just start throwing more and more stuff away. More and more, and pretty soon you're at Walden Pond. So I mentioned that Mike broke into a lot of woods work over on the peninsula, one of which was doing trail work. And he had became a little famous donkey called Balaam. So this is a poem after Mike died that thinking back on one of our trips, opening trail up the Hope River. It's called Hope River Trail, dedicated to him. Rain is relentless, and muddy stretches have swallowed the trail. We're soaked through, worn out, down to rice and Lipton soup. Even your stalwart donkey Balaam seems dispirited. Yet over tea and a smoky fire, you coax me on. One last push to Elk Lake and the meadows, and we'll have the whole trail open. Then we can drag our tired asses and single jackass the 16 miles out to the truck. Think of the stories you'll get from this, McNulty. Epics of misery, despair, and maybe even survival. Your sidelong grin as you load a pinch of Copenhagen is infectious. I shrug and rise, help fit the pack saddle and pad on the dog, saw, gas, Pulaski, shovel, still so much I had to learn. But knew in my bones, even then, we were in this together. No way could I bail. It's nearly 50 years later, Mike, and once more I watch as you head out into the mist ahead of me. When I find you again, it will be in mountains. Jiadao wrote in 9th century China, and you brought back to us in English. This morning, I lose you once more to farewell. Like John, you signed on early to a life of poetry and friendship. That was enough. But the rains returned with a vengeance this winter. The trail below Elk Lake slid out and forever closed to stock. Only you and Balaam now, on toward the mountain, vanished in blowing cloud. When I find you again, old friend. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. 17 and a half miles from Glacier Meadows out to the end of the 17 and a half. But it's downhill. We're going to have more tributes to Michael Connor. There's one poet who we're not doing a tribute to this year, but her work plays a big role in Cascadia Zen Volume 2, and that's Phyllis Webb, who passed away between the last Cascadia Poetry Fest and this one. There's a whole chapter of Volume 2 that is about Wilson's Bowl, named after Wilson Duff. And that's a tremendously interesting and complicated story. So we hope to tell it at the next Cascadia Poetry Festival. Did I mention November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd here in this place? Michael Daley gave a brilliant reading at Kubota Garden today. He lives in Anacortes on Fidalgo Island in the Rosario Strait of Juan de Fuca watershed and on Samish Nation traditional land. He taught English at Mount Vernon High for 22 years, and when he retired, he became publisher of Empty Bowl again, which he founded in 1976. Author of 9 books of poetry and translation, a book of essays. His work has appeared widely in many literary productions, Hudson Review, American Poetry Review, and others. In 2022, Pleasure Boat Studio published his novel, Telemachus. Dos Madres Press published Re-Inhabited, new and selected poems, and Cerveza Barba published his poetry collection, True Heresies. Here to talk more about Michael Connor is Michael Daley.
We've talked a lot about Empty Bowl, and it's really important to remember, well, I'll tell you this little story. It must have been the late 80s, Empty Bowl pretty much was done. We all really gave up. We ran out of money, most of us ran out of money. And we ran out of distribution and interest, really. That's it. Goodbye. Glad that's over. See you guys later. 2006, Michael Connor says, I want to revive Empty Bowl. I'm back in the cheap seats. No, Mike, don't do it. But he did. And he ran Empty Bowl under the auspices of Pleasure Boat Studio, at that time run by Jack Estes, who was living in New York. So Empty Bowl for 10 years was a New York press. And he ran it for 10 years. He published several wonderful books, the first of which was Tom Jay's book, which later on we did a expanded edition. But one thing about Mike was that, especially in his poetry, he never missed an opportunity to salute his friends or to write a poem about friendship, and which, of course, he gained from his love of great Chinese poets. So I know that Tim is going to hate me for this, but I'm going to read a poem titled For the Poet. I knew that. The poet of Pablo Creek. When was this? 70. For the poet of Pablo Creek. Long legs loping through alder woods, beard of black bush, pack on your back, twinkle in your eye, like the twinkle of a creeping sun. In your cabin by lamplight, you trace a trail of mountain range in the maps you cherish, more than any good original painting. You're an old wall gazer, mountain rider, know the names of all the flowers, kid. The only time I even faintly tasted the wrath you reserved for the Forest Service Timber Company Consortium, Trident, and Northern Tier was brushing trail up the Queets for $2 a day when the chainsaw gas was leaking on your new expensive sleeping bag. And maybe the time Balaam, our donkey, ate the last of our cheddar shelter. Ate the last of our cedar shelter. I like cheddar. During a rainstorm in the Kalawa, back when we were still calling winter red the jazzbird. You know the alchemy of song and the harp required. Here, I've set you out a cup of fresh rice tea and the only map of the 36 waterfalls of Canyon Creek. And you know, this book is rich with friendship poems. He's got so many. I wanted to read just two more that kind of really show Mike's range. Soliloquy of the Danish Cloister. He has a quote from Robert Browning. What's the Latin word for parsley? What's the Greek name for swine's snout? From Soliloquy of the Spanish Cloister, Robert Browning. After the evening sitting, Brother Joe confides, my legs were killing me that time waiting for the bell. I'm lending Joe some art books so he can paint the Buddha on the Zendo wall. I flipped to a plate of the colossal Buddha, Cave 20, Yun Kang Shanxi. Yeah, he says. Brother Steve, in beard and wild hair, joins us, saying, man, I just couldn't quit thinking of how to hang that show. He's a photographer, and I've thrown in a few pictures of Japan to go with his exhibit at the Salao Cafe. Yes, I say. I thought a little of the show myself, but decided to let you think about it. Soon, Abbot Niels, the Dane, shows up and leads us to where he plans to build, completely out of rubbish, a cabin. Of course, I'll push a little beyond the building code, he says, and then play absolutely dumb. He laughs and hops about and rolls another American Spirit cigarette. When he's arrested, I figure I'll be the lead candidate for Roshi. And this one, Dawn on Jade Mountain, Yushan, for Philip William. At 3 o'clock we're woken, who have hardly kept at White Cloud Mountain Shelter. At 3 o'clock we're woken, who have hardly slept at White Cloud Mountain Shelter, late fall, 3,500 meters. It's warm somehow, and when I step outside, everywhere the stars are thick and bright. Skirting a ravine, the trail climbs through a gnarled mix of pine, hinoki, cypress, breaks out in switchbacks, rock. Our string of flashlights glows candle-like in the dark south face of Yushan. I keep looking around at the sword and belt of the hunter, at the cloud of white and Pleiades. I keep almost falling over. A woman in our party begins a mountain song, mellifluous, sure, and a second woman knows just where to come in. Tinkling backpack bells help indicate the route. It cools. The stars pale and seem to roll away below us. We're 3,800 meters and close. A scrub juniper community and tilted strata of shale as we approach the crest. This is the realm before thought, expansiveness and fragrant air. We pass through the Feng Cove where the wind is born, then a scrabble to the frosty peak. A long horizontal band, peach-like, virginal among other bands where the sun will be, and a world of painted clouds and peaks. The alpine zone of Asia at the Tropic of Cancer, snowless above jungle evergreen, resembling the Olympics back home at 5,000 or 6,000 feet, yet high as Mount Rainier. The sun lifts from the Pacific, small and red, and the edges of cirrus above turn blinding gold. I bow, and the high-tech cameras of the climbers, Japanese, Chinese, American, flash. Yushan, once highest in the Japanese Empire, now its own national park. How mercifully you have yielded to our climb, placing me and friends on your monumental shoulders. The sun's rays strike our crag perch, warm my cold toes, then just a few steps higher. And the last poem, the irony of retaining safe transport. If a car crash should come, I won't be able to talk to you no more. I won't be able to test poetic measure with McNulty no more. I won't be able to peer at biographical minutiae with Jerry no more. I won't be able to smoke with Courtney, cut firewood with Bruce, steal cedar with Steve, have lunch with Jenny, plant trees with Jess, print poems with Ivan, play ball with Jack, hang on to my wife, hang on to my life if car crash should come. I'll just be instant tofu, car seat, windshield compost, the runny yolk of a man. Oh, Camus, if car crash should come. If vehicular collision should arise, no more thinking about the universe, no more thinking, no more universe, no eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, mind, no sight organ element, and so forth, until we come to, if car crash should come, no more rural walks at dusk, no more urban bookstore raids, no more sleeping in, no more rising bright, no sun, moon, stars, mountains, rivers, creeks, no wine or love. Oh, great, clear-cutting death rip. No more rent. Let me pay rent for eternity. And who will dig the esoteric bray of my exoteric poems, feed my cows and one lean crow, flash the accumulated data of my joy, heart, and magic if car crash should come? And who will be left to deal with the realtors, tranquilize the rednecks, and know all the clouds, cirrus, cirrostratus, altocumulus, stratocumulus, nimbostratus, cumulus, cumulonimbus, stratus, if great vehicular smash up manifest. And even though in a few short years, there'll be 6 or 7 billion of us going to town on the planet, smoking banana peels and naming the stars, who will be me? Michael Connor.
You know, they're feeding us well here, but when I heard about that cheddar shelter, I was trying to Andrew Schelling is an ecologist, naturalist, and explorer of wilderness areas. His poetry is known for its engagement with the rhythms and elements of the natural world, its use of literary forms derived from traditional Asian literary forms and from international modernism. Several books of poetry, 2 volumes of his essays have appeared, and he's edited several anthologies. I would point your attention to Disembodied Poetics, volumes 1 and 2, which are 2 amazing collections of essays. We've scanned those. The Ed Sanders, Fully Developed Bard, is that the name of it? Ed Sanders essay. Beautiful essays in that. He was part of the work of that with Ann Waldman. Please welcome one more person to talk about Mike O'Connor, Andrew Schelling.
Well, you know, if you have not seen Old Grove, take a look at a photo of Mike front. I mean, he's such an Irish leprechaun. Great cedar tree. He dropped into my life. Tim mentioned it after he returned from, I Taiwan. He decided to come to Colorado and get an MFA at the Jack Kerouac School. And very quickly, we became good friends and hiking comrades. And you know, I think about him a lot, and one of the things I think is he's really not gone. That sense of humor is still here with us. It changed me, and all those who knew him were really changed by it in a way. And then he had that incredible tenderness. We talked a lot about the kind of Chinese poems he liked to translate. You know, these friendship poems. I mean, Jia Dao was his guy. He really, you know, worked hard on that particular Tang Dynasty poet. But, you know, the poems of friendship meant a great deal. And, you know, I sort of always felt I'm translating these sort of, you know, weirdly intense sexual poems from Sanskrit, and they seem so like juvenile or something, or at least adolescent compared to these mature friendship poems that Mike translates. And I was once visiting him in Port Townsend, and we were walking through Fort Worth, he was just showing me around, and all of a sudden he said to me, "Andrew, I really envy you those poems of Sanskrit." And I almost fell over. I thought, I envy you those Chinese poems. It was, you know, sort of a great moment. But his sense of humor and his tenderness, I just want to read a couple poems of his here. One I think is one of the really beautiful poems, Sakura. Those of you who know anything about Japanese culture know that Sakura, as Jason mentioned today, are the cherry trees of Japan. Sakura. Lingering at door of bathhouse, I watched the woman bundle off children into light rain, small lane, Kyoto. Skirt in hand, she glances my way across the evening road, then up the walk after the party of colored rain boots and umbrellas. Wet-headed but warm, I'm waiting for Ling Wei to come out from the public bath, but can't help thinking of America, the disquietude strangers there inspire. Cherry trees are just beginning to break blossom here off Kitauji-dori north of town. Now the woman is crossing the lane, coming directly towards me. She wants to give me her open umbrella, insists that I take it without knowing where I'm going or who in the world I am. I thank her and bow and point to my broad-brimmed hat. Am I sure, she implores. Am I sure? There's hardly a raindrop in the rain-freshened air. She smiles and bows, returns to the sliding doors of her house. Kyoto, the old capital, bursts into blossom in my heart. I think it's a really, gorgeous poem. And only Mike could have written it. I thought of reading some of his funnier poems, but Mike would read a few of those and sort of, but Mike's sense of humor, I somehow feel like he was a Taoist immortal who was put on earth to be among us and teach us good cheer and tenderness and humor at the same time. I'm going to read a poem from late in the book, Mike's friendship, so many friendship poems, and this one is for me, called Climbing South Arapahoe Peak. Massive granite rockies, powdered light with snow, new ridges, tarns, massifs, the higher we go. Crack ice at 12,000 feet, drink water that chills to the marrow. And the wind, in the calm, sunny sky, sings and blasts across the mountain. Finally, at the pass, we hunker down and hand-heat stone windbreak, eat lunch, and drink hot tea. Out there, a magnificent shining. Out there, the wind hunting everywhere for us. that day actually, what Mike doesn't put in the poem is we ate our sandwiches. The wind was getting cold, the wind was getting really strong, and we were going to scale the last 600 feet up a very exposed ridge. And Mike looked at me sort of sheepishly and said, I don't know if I can go up. I forgot my gloves. And I looked at him even more sheepishly and said, guess what? I forgot mine too. So that was, a ridge or a pass really, right on the flank of South Arapahoe. Mike had the elevation wrong. It wasn't 12,000 feet, it was 13,000 feet. So we were, really quite up there. And if you can imagine this, if you look straight south, which is the view we had, sitting in that little rock shelter eating our sandwiches, and then you just cut your way east about 3 degrees. There's an unnamed promontory sort of above Chittenden Mountain. And when Mike died, and there was a memorial for him on Zoom, because it was the COVID era, I sort of hesitantly asked what became of Mike's earthly remains, and was told that he was being cremated and most of the ashes were being scattered somewhere around here. And I said, a little hopefully, if you've got any spare ashes, I should really scatter them in the mountains of Colorado, or I'd love to be able to do that. And about 6 months later, Jack Estes sent me a little packet of ashes. So, where I've asked you to focus your eyes on that unnamed promontory just south of where Mike and I had been sitting for that poem, went up there one day with a friend who knew Mike's work very well. This is a poem called Seeking But Not Finding the Master, which is a famous poem of Jadal, the Tang Dynasty poet. I need to just give a little gloss on one of it. At one point, I used the term young master, young master. That's what Mike used to call me because he was 2 years older than me. I was his teacher. And Mike had this incredible way of sort of pinning you with his blue eye and saying something reverential. And you couldn't tell if he was just waiting for you to, slip and fall or something. There was so much mockery in his reverence, and so much reverence in his mockery. It was really a beautiful thing. Seeking but not finding the master. Where but the high tundra do you see such colors? Dry crimson, burnt orange, pale green, tawny gray. We've carried Mike O'Connor's ashes in a small parcel to fling for the wind. I envied you the cool friendship poems found in China. You envied India's spicier lyrics. Us both perplexed, epidemic rage tormenting our planet. The jobs to store seeds of language, of rhythm, for the better world, there in front, around the bend, out ahead. Tim Hogan recites mantras. Young master, you said, mischief that blue eye, mock reverence on that tilted head, who held 2 passports, mystic songster, old Ireland, bee cinder on tundra, ash on the wind.
Right. Teresa's getting ready to talk about poet Marion O'Riordan and tell the story of how Theresa and I met each other. And Marion O'Riordan was a legend, living off the grid for 40 years. I know you're going to tell the story, but I just want to say, the last 7 miles, was a dirt road to her house. And Bhakti and I went there and stayed with her a couple of days and did 3 pretty long interviews. And there she is. And So we'll get to hear her in her own words and Theresa about her friendship.
Yeah, so I met Paul and Bhakti when they came down in 2019 to interview Mary Norbert Corte for the Prophets series. And so because I manage the poetry calendar in Mendocino County, I'm kind of the go-to, and people from outside the county want to contact one of the poets who live down 7 miles of dirt road. And so Sharon DiBiago put Paul in touch with me, and I got him Mary's number, and then I looked him up, and I'm like, he has a book called Poet Coming. And so I asked him to read for the local community. We have a monthly series. And then he suggested we have a coffee, so he and Bhakti came over to the studio, and then he invited me up. But anyway, the story is really about Mary, but that was a wonderful connection that him coming for her precipitated. So Mary Corte, we had the incredible honor of having her be in Mendocino County for most of her adult life after her incredible earlier life as a nun, and then running away to join the Beatnik Poets in the Bay Area poetry scene. And so it was just an incredible honor to have her in our poetry community. And up until when she passed away, she was in her 90s. And into her late 80s, she was still getting arrested and taken to jail for civil disobedience. They were trying to prevent a freeway bypass from going in that was going to go straight through a wetland. And the judge told her that he was tired of seeing her. So, are you ready to listen to Mary?
Yes.
Yes.
Mares Espinantes. Lucifer, the angel, the cat. These three watch. Under their benevolent gaze, scorpions become docile. Mice stay outside. Spiders calmly take care of flies. Children cease squabbling. Men pick up after themselves. One must pay attention over long with years to the long line of little gods, ancestors in portraits, lithographs, shelved statues. They made us, they live with us. We are their children. We are their children.
There she is looking at the notes I made on the poem for the interview.
Mares Espinantes.
Good.
Lucifer, the angel, the cat. These three watch. Under their benevolent.
There you go. Mary was a nun, got special dispensation to attend the Berkeley Poetry Conference of 1965. There's a great picture of her in her habit with Jack Spicer. It's a classic photograph. You can find it online. And she engaged with Spicer at that conference, asked him if the Union songs of the 20s and 30s, if he considered them poetry, and he did. And then she started getting hooked up with the poets, and Mother Superior had to bail her out from jail for marijuana possession. But she did bail her out, and she knew she was not long for that life, and became a redwood activist and took care of that piece of property in extreme southern Cascadia for 40 years. Also taking food from the convent to feed the diggers, which is just a beautiful thing. Here's a canned ham from the church. All right, we have one more poet to talk about, and here to talk about Michael McClure's Amy Evans McClure. She creates spirit guides through her sculpture, figures, horses, goddesses, Buddhas, abstract shapes. She began life in New York, was illuminated by Arizona mountains and mesas. Now her art grows near forests and ocean in the Bay Area of Northern California. Her most recent sculptural commission is installed in the Bancroft Library, UC Berkeley. She lives in the hills of Oakland with horses nearby and freeway roars below, Amy Evans McClure.
Forgive me, I am not a poet. I've spent this weekend listening to some wonderful poetry. I've listened to a lot of poetry over the last 40 years. Thank you, Paul. I don't know how many decades ago I sat down in a beer hall somewhere after a poetry reading, and this young kid was sitting next to me. And he started to recite to me Michael McClure's poetry with an insight that only I thought Michael could have about his poetry. It turned out to be this kid, Paul Mills. So I fell in love with Paul that night, and many years later, here I am. Today we were at the Kubota Gardens, and again, forgive me, I'm not a poet, but standing there with all the poets in that beautiful space, I had a conversation with a duck. And I had to write it down. Emerald head, black tipped yellow beak, one orange leg, akimbo in green black water. Mallard eyes the bridge. Look, a gaggle of poets. Thank you, duck. Once, this was all black plasma and imagination. Michael Thomas McClure arrived in Kansas, October 20, 1932, and left this realm from our home in Oakland, in the hills by the headwaters of Peralta Creek, which was not a good enough name for Michael. He renamed it Dogan Creek. He passed on the evening of May 4th, 2020. Once this was all black plasma and imagination. Michael and I shared 34 years of our lives together, an amazing journey. Not ever, even for a moment, was it boring, difficult at times, but never boring. My soulmate's life's work was building that huge soul of his. He worked to protect the veil of soulmaking for others. His big soul was filled with light and wit and song. And like poets we've heard from before, there are many poems for people, for his, in this book, his daughter and her husband, for Gary Snyder, which is also in the Zen anthology, for friend Norma Schlesinger, for Zoketsu Norman Fisher, for Diane Prima, for Jack Michelin, for Jack Kerouac, for Jack Spicer. It goes on and on. But he also lived just north of here in Seattle from age 5 to probably 13 or 14. And those blue-black waters of this place stayed, I think, in his blood and his soul and in his poetry forevermore. He read voraciously biology, biography, history, detective novels, poetry, science, comic books to the classics. At 22, he joined with his friends, who became lifelong friends, Gary Snyder, Allen Ginsberg, Philip Whalen, in their very first public poetry reading in San Francisco. And I asked Alan one time, was it really your first reading? And he said, oh yeah, I was nervous. Philip Lamantia was also at that reading, but he'd given readings before in Paris with the Surrealists. Michael was something of an experienced junkie, ingesting peyote, journeying across borders, oceans, and continents, through the realms with body and mind, touching the liverworts and hill rainforest, tasting the flowers of the tree morning glory in the Sonoran Desert because he heard that in their seeds is the lysergic alkaloid of LSD, but he didn't get high. Walking gingerly through zebra herds in the Masai Mara,
Somewhere he wrote in some poem, all conceptions of boundaries are lies. Thoreau wrote, how vain it is to sit down to write when you have not stood up to live. Michael gently rephrased this thought to become a guiding light, lighting up pathways for decades of students. He shared it year after year. His version was, one must stand up and live before you sit down to write. Go out and save a species. Once this was all black plasma and imagination, he wrote. And his lifelong dear sister friend, without imagination there is no memory. Without imagination there is no sensation. Without imagination there is no will, no desire. Diane DePrima goes on. The only war that matters is the war against the imagination. All other wars are subsumed in it. There is no way out of the spiritual battle. There is no way. You cannot have a poetics, no matter what you do. Plumber, baker, teacher, you do it in the consciousness of making or not making your world. You have a poetics. In Cascadian Zen, there are concentric communal circles. Among the parish poets are a few of Michael's closest friends, Diane DePrima, Joanne Kyder, Philip Whalen, also Mary Milbert Corte, Robin Glazer, Denise Levertov, Sam Hamill. Let's raise a glass, let's raise our glasses to their lives. Let's raise our eyes to their work and express gratitude for that community that they gathered and nurtured, handed down to us with all their genius and folly that we all have as human mammals. Michael was first and always a poet, and a playwright, a performer, a novelist, a teacher, a journalist, a painter, a grandfather, a thinker, a reader, an action philosopher, a curious seeker, a lover, a friend, funny, serious, public, private, sincere. Sincere, said Ron Silliman one night. McClure's poetry is without wax. It's not a marble statue that's been cracked and filled with wax. It's sincere, sincere. Precise, as Robert Hunter pointed out. And as Peter Kyrie said, he's an artist finding new language, new words to express his feelings. I was a bit flummoxed when I sat down to think about a tribute to Michael here in Cascadia. And then I looked again at Heart is a Horn Book, in memory of Michael McClure, a piece by John Olson, who lives here. Thank you, John. He gave me permission to read a bit of it. John Olson's words. Language is a living organism, and no one appreciated that more than McClure. He discovered its essential biology in its patterns and structures, its movements and tactility, its intellective élan and propagative éclat, its paradoxical synergism of organization and disorganization, what McClure liked to refer to as a systemless system. McClure's words. To create poetry, one must have a system, or an anti-system, or a systemless system. A systemless system is one that alters itself in the waves with a living anarchism, like the evolution through scores of millions of years of the Portuguese man of war and other colonial celentrates, or the migration systems worked out by the bison or the wildebeest. Each individual, and now McClure is referring to mammals, us human mammals, each individual's actions and patterns are a recapitulation of the old deep patterns in the meat. He loved to use the word meat rather than flesh, because I think he meant the spirit goes deep into the meat. John Olson's words. McClure inscribed a copy of Specs to me with a poem carefully written in black ink. The poem. Anarchy is the high, the systemless system. A pelican's skull is solid light. I don't know whether this poem was written especially for me. It was, John, because I've never seen it before. Or if it's from another collection, but what a great poem. It consolidates all the significant features of McClure's poetry and ends in a burst of light, solid light. The poem is a luminous bulb of photonic rhetoric, a delicate skull on the palm of my imagination. Thank you, John. McClure's poetry arose from a deep animal bond with the natural world. His imagery was a bouillabaisse of lipids and virus, a constellation of shoe soles and earthworms, emerald genomes, creaking floorboards, and the scent of decayed apples in the desk drawer. His poetry evinces the keen intellect and seditious instincts of Shelley with the exquisite sensuality of Keats. He is a master of subtlety. His poetry is a profusion of those parenthetical moments, those interstices in the daily grind, when the pressures of obligation loosen and another awareness takes over, a deeper cognition of the myriad phenomena in our sensorium. I feel permission to enjoy the fullness of being when I read these words. They become incandescent. I feel the heat and pulse of their words, their syllables mingling in protozoan suspension, pyramidal masses impounding the scuffle of feet in a crowded room and bringing us into a beckoned silence where the open field of the poem is, quote, vibrant with the delicate wildness in all life. The senses are hungers, McClure wrote in one of his poems. Liberation is physical. Everything I touch is spread through me and reverberates. It's hard believing someone is dead when you're reading their words, taking in their thoughts and perceptions, especially true when you can remember the sound of their voice, their inflections, and rhythms. Thank you, John. Oh, accident. Oh, perfect, crushed snail, like a star gone out. That was, I think, my favorite haiku novel. Bill Whalen and Michael Hubbard haiku. I think, I don't know, what's their favorite poem? Can you have a favorite poem? Is there a best painting? But a poem that I love, because Michael wrote it long before I met him, I'm sure, but when I first read it, I was positive this song was written for me. I work with the shape of spirit, moving the matter in my hands. I mold it from the inner matrix. Even a crow or fox understands. Thank you.
And we'll let Michael get the last words from my 1995 interview with him, October of 95, after I went up to Appleton Pass and beyond and read his book and had a chance to talk to him about it. And here's him reading from the poem Dolphin Skull, the section.
So here's a few stanzas from Dolphin Skull. And these are gay, energetic gazes into the unconscious, written spontaneously without changes. Broken shells and sand are not superhuman. Everything is divine. The body is the soul, the intelligent body. Cries from sand are little crab's eyes, creepy and bright as the musky smell of decaying algae and sunshine. A cold wind makes chilblains and bumps on the skin. Going back to the moment of the Big Bang. The Big Bang is the consciousness of lions dispersing the eagles. An eagle lands on the bare tree by the car and tears up a rabbit. Souls of dead babies. You know these things, like the smell of new tires, while flight after flight of planes with bombs pass over. I'm still here, just as I ever was. I am furious and fragile, Begging is heroic. Striding is free, a spirit can in its swirls. Breaking up rainbows of agonies into actions. Part of this dark flow that is turned over and over by the hands of light with fingernails of movies. Movies of suns spraying the darkness. Gray hair on the floor. Gray hair on the floor and the radio talking. Steering wheel, more real than anything else. Foggy yellow lights in the tunnel. Skinny, avid, wrinkled, childlike, old Horowitz playing Scriabin on TV. Me playing this beautiful pen. More alive than I ought to be. More alive than I ought to be. Oceans and freeways of grief and guilt, triumphs of bare feet and drugs up the nose, child of cocaine and raccoons and hollow logs, fusus scriptesti fillet. Nature loves to hide herself in Leonardo's secret language and the dimensions that disappeared after the bang. Old men dreaming of great-grandfathers are very wise, like soapbugs and wooden spools wound with scarlet thread, and an antlered puck that drinks from a bowl in the yard in moon shadows. Fusus cryptesti fillet is from Heraclitus, and means nature loves to hide herself.
Thanks to all the people who made this event possible. Thank you all for attending and being part of this work. This is the fest. You're welcome to linger. I came, I saw, I lingered. I'm grateful that you're here. Thank you.